Bavidi, your host and producer of the Mind of the Baganda. Join me as we look more closely at the historical context behind the current strife for the restoration of the Buganda nation, separate from Uganda, as Buganda Kingdom enters into 20 years reign of Kabaka Ronald Muyunda Mutebi II. In this film, we will also examine what the future holds for the relations between Uganda government and the Buganda Kingdom, and for Buganda's place in Uganda. Welcome.
Sabasajja yasiima omulembe omuteri gw'abavubuka ab'omutima bye bakutte ekintu ab'omutima bye bakutte eddamula bagwanira engalo si balimba ggwe bagwana kulabako babeewo Sabasajja yasiima omulembe omuteri gw'abavubuka ab'omutima bye bakutte ekintu ab'omutima bye bakutte eddamula Rwanda Sabasajja Sabasajja yasiima omulembe omuteri gw'abavubuka ab'omutima bye bakutte ekintu ab'omutima bye bakutte eddamula bagwanira engalo si balimba ggwe bagwana kulabako babeewo Maika Katikkiro Omujjuvu
kati genda ng'okunywako akalala katonotono ng'ogabira n'abala katono eyo nnene kiragabudde Buganda. Jajja wali bali kiragabudde Buganda. Jajja wali bali Uganda.
Human anthropology has gone through evolution from feudal institutions in the form of traditional monarchies to societies of ideologies of capitalism and communism. There have been choices of societies of this system, the communist system of the former Eastern countries and the capitalistic system of the West, in which some societies opt to balance feudalism and capitalistic demands of people such as Britain, Denmark, Sweden, to mention a few. While some Western capitalistic countries like the French abolished their monarchy, all societies have destiny. How they move ahead is a work of the people's moods, the evolution of their institutions that govern them at a given time. The dynasties themselves survive on the destiny and ancestry of their institutions and the popular support offered to them. The history of a people can best be explained by their racial origins. Every society has two myths: the myth of ancestry concerning the origins of that society and the myth of purpose or mission, emphasizing the uniqueness of that society. Many African societies have given up their own myth of origin in favor of the Semitic one from Genesis. The story of Adam and Eve, the legend of the Garden of Eden, and how death came into the world has now triumphed over cultures. There are, of course, other myths of origin all over Africa that sustained the equation between the origins of human race and the origins of particular tribes. Buganda's myth of origin concerns Kintu, the first Muganda, but also in some versions of the myth, the first human being. Kintu, according to Ganda mythology, came from the sky not only with his wife Nambi, but also in the company of her brother Walumbe. We want to ask you as the director of the social studies here at Makerere University, I'm interested in the story of Kintu.
Once upon a time, there was a man called Chintu who married this woman called Nambi, and Nambi was supposed to be, like the first lady of Buganda.
Yes.
And Chintu the first man in Buganda.
Yes.
And Nambi had brothers, and Nambi also brought seeds. And among so many other things that Nambi brought was death. You know about that story?
Yes.
When he went back to collect his brother Walumbe, when she had been told not to go back to collect the brother.
Yes.
So basically, the myth of Nambi is the myth of the creation myth, I should say.
Yeah.
It's like the Genesis. It's like the Adam and Eve. It's like the Mumbi and in Kenya, among the Kikuyu. So it's a myth that is equivalent to so many other myths around.
Yes, Adam and Eve. The
Adam and
Christian
Eve,
interpretation.
yes.
Okay. So this, the Nambi story is actually from the Ganda perspective of the creation mythology.
Yes.
Of how they come into existence,
Yes.
and how death comes upon them.
Yeah, but which came prior to even their contact with the Christian, the Christianity as a religion and Islam as a religion. They all had their own myths.
Okay.
About, all these myths try to explain one thing, how did we come and why do we die?
Okay.
That is the essence of these myths, because these were myths or people in a non-scientific age, and they were trying to explain how did we come, how did the earth come, why do we live, how do we relate to others, why do we die, so the bringer of life, who is Nambi or who is Eve, is also charged with taking away life. It's in Genesis, she eats the apple. In Buganda, she goes back to collect the brother, like Walumbe.
Does she go back to collect the brother or to collect the millet for the chicken?
She goes back to collect the millet,
Yes.
but also comes with the brother.
Okay.
Yeah, in one way or the other. So you cannot look at the myth,
Yes.
and you cannot take the myth out of its historical development.
True.
When does the myth come back? Or when does the myth become the myth? Because, later on, which is a myth, is actually trying to explain how did we come here
Yes.
in this place? Why aren't we Zulus? Because some of our relatives moved on to
Yes.
Zulu land. Others moved to Kenya. Others moved through Tanzania. Why did we settle here?
Okay.
Who are we? Why do we die? Why do we suffer? This is what those people at that particular time tried to explain.
Many historians believe that Buganda Kingdom emerged as a product of human labor and her environment.
Semakula Chiwanuka, chapter 5, I think of his book, really talks about the development of Buganda, like the Buganda Kingdom.
Yes.
And chapter 5, you really see that it's the invaders, the people who are coming, the Nile Saharan invaders that were called in the colonialist period, they were called the Hamites, who invaded. And what we see is that they are coming in an area where already the Bantu had moved in.
Okay.
So this area, the Bantu had already, sort of settled.
Yes.
And then we have other people moving in from, the people who are supposed to have come in, the Kintu and the Smiths and so on, who are later going to form the Kingdom of Buganda.
Through labor, the people of Buganda appropriated and humanized nature. in the process transformed themselves and made their own nature.
The myth uses sexual metaphors
Okay.
to, in one way or the other, legitimate a more rigid sexual division of labor.
Yes.
You know, and in not only a more rigid sexual division of labor, but a more rigid sexual genderized agenda.
As they continued to labor, they created social relations forged in the process of sustaining and reproducing themselves.
Buganda then moves from the kingdom
Yes.
to clans,
Yes.
Abataka.
Yes.
From Bataka. If you look at the Bataka is the clan leaders.
Yes.
But the clan leaders or the clan does not develop in isolation. The clan develops out of families.
Okay.
And the Luganda terminology we use is Maka.
Okay.
Maka, Taka, Bataka, Mutaka, and then Sabataka.
In the end, they developed a feudal kingdom where the peasants, the cultivating masses, were subject to the rule of their leader, the Sabataka, the head of clans.
Maka, Butaka, Maka, Taka, Butaka, Mutaka, Sabataka.
Growing crops was the duty of women, and the agricultural tasks of the Baganda men was confined to clearing the land. The men also made cloth from bark and leaves. The peasant Baganda men also built their king's residence, constructed roads, and staffed the army and navy. The existence of agriculture surplus and the expansion of trade in the early 18th and 19th centuries led to intra-regional trade. Thus, direct exchange took place between Buganda and other regions. The pastoral Hima Bata traded their milk, meat, butter and hides. Toro Kingdom had a good supply of copper, which specialized in copper working. The Basoga built and supplied Buganda Kingdom canoes for transport on Lake Victoria. The Kayonza in Kigezi and the Banyoro, who made use of their own iron deposits, had developed good smiths and manufacturers and exported spear and hoe blades to Buganda. They were also the major suppliers of salt, and their poultry was in constant demand. Trade grew to substantial proportions, and by the first half of the 19th century, due to the high demand of ivory in Europe and United States, Buganda Kingdom began supplying these regions. Beginning in the 18th century, three distinguishable processes emerged. First, the Kabaka, in order to encounter the power of regional and hereditary Bataka clan, began creating a hierarchy of territorial but appointed Bakungu chiefs. Then, since the Bataka chiefs also exercised a monopoly over religious authority, the Kabaka in mid-19th century invited other religious systems, the likes of Muslims. At the end of the 19th century, the Kabaka had invited Christians to preach their faith in Buganda capital. The existence of the Bakungu chief successfully reduced the power of the Bataka, but it also created a bigger problem for the Kabaka, who soon found it necessary to deal with the pretensions of the overpowerful Bakungu. He had to do something about this emerging problem. He did this by creating a standing army under his personal command. By 1854 and 1884, Sekabaka Mutesa I, who owed his enthronement as Kabaka to the most powerful Bakungu chief in the land, the Katikilo, instituted a standing army with a permanent Muyisa, a general, and with a Mutongole, a sub-chief, as captain. However, had the Kabaka not designed this centralized entity to begin with, then the chiefs would have had the measure of independence from the throne, and thus they would have effectively used the gun to encounter the centralized policies of the throne. When the Kabaka realized this, he began to monopolize the ivory trade. He effectively controlled the importation and ownership of the guns the Arabs brought to exchange for ivory. In the end, his kingdom became very powerful, and it was the only one in the region that was equipped with firearms. By the end of the 19th century, Buganda Kingdom had successfully created an infrastructure basis for the national and mercantile economy. A network of roads constructed and maintained by Kavyo labor linked the countryside with a royal capital. Such labor formed part of the annual tax on the peasantry, and the chiefs were expected to supervise. Thus, the process of social development in pre-colonial Buganda was complete. However, it was not the level of either economy or the politics alone that Buganda became a mighty kingdom, but it was the involvement of dialectical relation. The absence of rigid caste distinctions and the process of class mobility had made possible political centralization, which became the basis for building an infrastructure and collecting a large surplus. The introduction of the gun and the throne's political monopoly further enhanced the process of growth in Buganda. By the 1890, Mengo, the capital of Buganda, had 77,000 people, and it became a trading town. Even a colonialist like Captain Lugard, when he first came to Uganda, could not help remark on the great process of civilization among the kingdom. But such society was not to be. Instead, the late 19th century saw the colonization of the Buganda Kingdom, a process that brought a qualitative transformation. Colonialism exploited and weakened local tradition myths and tradition power institutions. The African myth and its evolution has been one of the most painful. It suffered subsequent forced metamorphosis. Slave trade speeded the negative process.
Europeans fitted themselves into existing trading patterns along the African coast, and then gradually, as the slave trade became more important, came to dominate the slave trade as a whole.
A whole fabric of social and political system was torn apart. Traditional ruling institutions were weakened by the process of depopulation through slave trade.
Men who were most wanted as slaves were, of course, men who were in the prime of life, teenagers, men in their 20s. They were strong and they were angry.
These factors intercepted and retarded normal African social and political monarchy myth as local power institutions, and the psychic Muntu myth of a person, an individual loyal to the greater power myth, were affected. The fact was that the colonial integrated economy had reduced all labor to the lowest common denominator, that of an unskilled labor. Africa today is a collection of new soulless, non-homogeneous entities, a result of programs of partition of the continent by colonialists. These new states have now built political and government institutions through a Western-trained local generation of politicians. These local politicians seem to be at a crossroads on choices of types of workable political systems that should conveniently incorporate tradition and what is now referred to as modernity, tradition, monarchy, and the so-called modern state systems. It is this that is the crisis. Uganda has had long, valuable working monarchies, among which the most stable and well-organized is the Buganda Kingdom, dating back to the beginning of the 14th century. It was these monarchies that were first exposed to outsiders. First the Arabs, whose mission was slave trade, to Europeans, who brought missionaries, The Buganda monarchy was therefore exposed to intervention from outside forces with divergent interests. The Arab slave traders were simply interested in economic gain in their contacts with the monarchy.
The slave trade distorted and made slavery something qualitatively different and exponentially more brutal than what was known in African society.
The European missionaries were to expand spiritual messages, but also paved their way into colonial and administration, which engulfed the monarchy and dominated even a wider land, also known as Uganda today. The stage was therefore set for conflicts between the monarchy and the new foreign forces. Mwanga's rule was the first attempt to resist British colonialism in the early 19th century. This was because the first colonial agents found Buganda the only well-structured institution, monarchy in Central Africa, and therefore by crushing it meant an exception of others. The resistance of Mwanga was legitimate. This was because Mwanga in 1855 resisted the multiple religions, Islamic and Christianity, and later alone punished the local rebels by burning 22 of them alive, who are now referred to as Uganda Martyrs. The climax of this conflict came under 1894 agreement. This agreement emphasized several things, but the most crucial ones that affected Buganda even today were incorporating Buganda monarchy into the colonial state of Buganda, thus the British administration. Secondly, the monarchy was removed from its local tradition nature into a constitutional monarchy whose very existence now depended on the British crown. An article in the 1894 agreement which Mwanga resisted and therefore made him lose his crown stated that the successor nominated as Kabaka must be approved by the colonial government, without whose approval no person shall be recognized as Kabaka of Buganda. These conflicts led to the forcing out and eventually exiling of Mwanga in the Seychelles Islands by the British Protectorate government. He later died in exile.
Leka naffe tuwere fa abasajja